just leading a little bit through the genesis of the topic and our conversation, and then Doug is gonna land us with where we landed and set us up
Matt's
for the
going.
perfect. I'm sorry, Matt. I know.
It's flattery.
I'm
flattered,
sorry. And we're gonna make Doug present too. We keep trying to get him to. But so this morning, some threads that emerged when the grantee partners and field partners were here were around resources and the role of philanthropy and grantees and working together to kind of see the systemic change we've been talking about, and also the sustainability of movements, the sustainability of each of us as individuals doing this work, and particularly for people doing frontline work and for people who've experienced trauma in the field, and for organizational well-being and health and movement building, and that all needs resources. And I really want to thank Manuela and Marta for their leadership in making space for the conversation we've been prepared to have to shift to sort of honor what had arisen in the room organically. And so this topic kept emerging, and so it became one of the 3 topics for this afternoon, and we felt grateful for that because it does feel so pressing. And the question that we developed this morning through a workshop process was, how do we bring extra resources to the work? So we were the group that self-selected to answer this question. And we had some conversation, as you can see, about the field, including talking about how funds are shifting, trends around the investment of big tech dollars, the movement away from youth justice work, shifting from local strategies, differences among the field, like child welfare and juvenile justice. But ultimately, we kind of landed with, we don't really have the answer to this question. And we were able to do a little mapping of the things we've experienced individually and collectively. But we really felt like this was a rare and unique opportunity to sit in thought partnership collectively with foundations, with field partners, with people from across the movement, and collectively answer this question, which is what we're hoping to do through World Cafe, because we did explore some possibilities for capacitating extra resources, but ultimately we also had a lot of questions about how we might be more effective in that. And we've, someone in our group contributed how it's like organizing for resources, right? And what are our best practices and tactics for organizing for resources? And how do we work with you? And the you is all the yous, the collective you. How do we work as one organism to move this? And the last thing I'll say is we really acknowledge that this work, as others have said, is complex, it's multidimensional, it is hard. We're talking about deeply ingrained systemic oppression and racism and structural injustice and mass incarceration, and like minor investments and individual approaches are not, there are no match. And the problem is a web, and the solution is webbed. And the solution is a movement, the solution is a field, the solution is interconnected. When the problem is a web, the solution can't be a lone wolf. So I'm gonna turn it over to Matt, who is not Doug, to talk about.
Thank you, Lisa. I mean, Gabrielle. You've already beautifully articulated most of our conversation, so I appreciate it. I'm going to end with a couple of things. So one is that to build on Gabrielle's sort of important points, that we were really struggling with what are these opportunities to really expand resources for this movement. And we talked about things like MRIs, which are not just ways to scan your body, but are actually funding vehicles, or PRIs, program-related investments. We talked about donor advised funds, and we looked at public and government and private foundation, and we went through like where can we get money, or how can this field get money, and realized we don't know all of these answers. We don't understand. Some of these things, some of these spaces and places aren't where we have the knowledge, and that rather than trying to tell you all what we think we need to do, I think we need to really step back and ask ourselves deeper questions, and then ask funders, and in partnership with funders, to ask those questions too. And I think where we ended up focusing on in some ways was like, what are the right questions to ask? How can folks who are, in the movement, at the ground level, be real partners and collaborators with funders, because we share a lot of the same goals and the vision. And so it was really interesting ultimately to spend focus on like what are the right questions to ask. And so one of the questions that we really ended up landing with is, and this is a question we'll pose to you all in the next session, is what advice and experience can you bring to us to leverage resources to fund this movement? So what can you offer to our group to help us better understand how we raise resources? And then I think the other question is a little bit more of a challenging one, but I think also really important, is that how does our movement, how does this group of folks who are working with folks who are system involved, either through policy or through organizing, or through other ways, how should we collectively organize so that funders invest more in these spaces? In other words, how should we bring our own organizing strategy, our own organizing knowledge to ensure that and work with funders so that funders change their practices, do the kind of investments that help support the kind of work we're trying to accomplish. So those are the questions that we spent a lot of time thinking about what the right questions were, and we're looking forward to hearing what y'all have to say. Anything else that we missed? Please, yeah. Doug.
Yes, please. Please, you go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
So one of the things I didn't see on the list, and I don't know if it's an opportunity or a barrier, is I've noticed some of the larger foundations are actually hiring leaders from the field who were the organizers or the leaders of the movement as program people in their foundations. So I don't know if that's stealing the thunder from the movement, or is that helping you access foundation resources and changing culture and changing whatever perspectives of the foundations by having those people in those positions. And I don't know if that's just a California thing, but the tech people, or if you're seeing that more extensively. Is it an opportunity or a barrier or a little of each?
Well, I think we're interested in hearing what you think,
Yeah.
because I think that part
From
of
the surface,
yeah.
I feel like it's draining the movement more than it's helping the foundations, but I don't know.
You can get
I'd
to
rather
the
be-
phone cafe.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say that our conversation was just as we said up here is about partnership, thinking together. So I would just be curious to think about how working together we can use every available tool in our toolbox, both on the funder side as well as the grantee side, to really try to address this question of how do we bring in extra resources to fund a much larger movement.
I would say also, Diane, I have observed some of that, and it's also happened on the government side where we've had some really amazing, progressive, righteous bureaucrats, I love that term, who have also hired people who come from the advocacy world, and we've seen a lot of positive results from that in New York. I would say though that the fact that it is also a drain speaks to the lack of leadership development and capacity building, and actually organizations cannot be about one person. The movement can't be about one person, and I think as we heard so beautifully from group one, I'm looking, Youth Action Network, but like how certain people are held up, and they often tend to be people with privilege or white people or people who speak a certain way or who have a certain experience, are held up as like the movement is them or they're making this change, but it cannot be about any one person. And so I think that like part of when a leader shifts into a different sector, there should be a whole field around them so that it's not a vacuum. And the fact that there is a vacuum speaks to our challenges around capacity building and leadership and around collaborative leadership.
I was just gonna say also, like, we look at ourselves as a leadership organization that's key in movement and thinking like 20 years out, that like we need new leaders in every sector that carry these values toward freedom and liberation and justice. And so to me, I think it's two parts. One is, at least in our work at the Homeless Freedom Center, is that the leaders that we're investing in across the board, like folks aren't really checking on and saying like, oh, those are the leaders we need that just got out, right? But we know that with space and time to go deep and to support people, like the goal is that folks move into every sector with these values and with these skills. And quite honestly, like there's not a lot of pathways for folks that are poor, people of color, a little bit on welfare and public housing, like all of these things. And so that like I think that it becomes part of our duty as building movements to create those pathways, because I don't think philanthropy, as one example, has been saying, oh, for a long time, like, oh yeah, I want to have a program officer that dropped out of 7th grade and has been formerly incarcerated and grew up in public housing, right? And so I think that's important, but also what's important is that, so it's not just tokenization, but that the organizations have the infrastructure, like we were saying, to go deep, so we can have space to develop our own critical analysis about what's happening. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. A year ago, I got an ask by a collaborative in a Bay Area county to come help them find a young person to serve on their collaborative. Because they wanted youth representation, and they were sincere and thoughtful, that they believed that young people's participation was important. And I came down there and I said, I'm not going to do that for you. I'm not going to help you find young people to serve on your council. But what I will do is help you think about how you can build an infrastructure so that there is an organized group of young folks who can independently do the work, who are always there to participate, and that there'll always be leadership there, but you're going to have to invest. And I think, to my surprise, they were actually okay about that. But I think that's a new thing. I think it's taken a while for folks to get to that place, but I think that's the kind of thing we have to keep cultivating.
All right, so this is the model for more conversation. Thank you so much. So.